is typical in not according the expulsions even a single mention. What is true of German history textbooks is also the case with those dealing with the history of Europe as a whole, and even of the Central European states most directly concerned. Joseph Rothschild and Nancy Wingfield's fine survey of the region in the post-war era, Return to Diversity, by far the most accessible and reliable one-volume treatment of the subject, takes a cumulative total of less than a page to explain the means by which Poland and Czechoslovakia, until 1939 among the most heterogeneous and multicultural countries in Europe, had just 10 years later become ethnic monoliths. It is, then, entirely understandable why so many of my splendid and learned colleagues on the Colgate faculty should have expressed their confusion to me after reading in the newspapers in October 2009 that the President of the Czech Republic, Václav Klaus, had demanded that the other members of the European Union legally indemnify his country against compensation claims by ethnic German expellees, as the price of his country's ratification of the Lisbon Treaty. None had been aware that anything had occurred after the war in respect of which the Czech Republic might require to be indemnified. It would be incorrect, however, to attribute this pervasive ignorance of the expulsions, their context, and their consequences to any conspiracy of silence. What has occurred in the post-war era is something less calculated in nature, but more insidious in effect. The phenomenon of a historical episode of great significance that is hidden in plain sight. Certainly information, albeit of highly variable quality, on the expulsions is available for those who possess the requisite language competence and are prepared to go looking for it. A 1989 bibliography lists almost 5,000 works dealing with them to some degree in the German language alone. Even today, some 65 years later, living expellees are not hard to find. It has been calculated that a quarter of the current German population are expellees, or their immediate descendants. What is denied, then, is not the fact of the expulsions, but their significance. Relegated in textbooks to a single passing mention in a vaguely phrased sentence referring to the chaos existing in Germany in the immediate post-war era, or simply passed over in silence, the impression is effectively conveyed that they occupy a less important place in modern European history than the cultural meanings of football hooliganism, or the relevance of the Trabant automobile as a metaphor for East German society. Why this should be so is not difficult to understand, because any discussion of the expulsions immediately brings to the fore a host of deeply uncomfortable and, still, highly contentious and divisive questions. For Germans themselves, it invites debate over the dubious wartime record of the ethnic German minorities living outside the Reich, the so-called Volksdeutsche, and the degree to which they can be considered to have drawn their eventual fate upon themselves. For Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, and citizens of other expelling countries, it complicates and undermines a series of national narratives, supported by overwhelming consensus, of Germans exclusively as perpetrators and their own peoples exclusively as victims, as well as raising concerns about the durability of the legal arrangements through which ex-German properties came into the possession of their current owners. For citizens of the Allied countries, and especially those of the United States and Britain, it invites scrutiny of the complicity of their leaders and peoples in one of the largest episodes of mass human rights abuse in modern history, which bore a disturbing resemblance, in some respects at least, to Nazi Germany's wartime effort to reconfigure the demographic contours of the continent by similar means. The history of the expulsions is one from which few, if any of those directly involved, emerge in a creditable light. It is not surprising, then, that there should be a great deal of reluctance to try to integrate a messy, complex, morally compromised, and socially disruptive episode that remains to this day a political hot potato into the history of what most people still rightly consider a justified crusade, or as Americans put it, a good war against one of the most